Decision 2018. The race for governor. Tonight, the Democrats debate. Sponsored by today's TMJ4, WUWM, WIS Politics, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and USA Today Network. Live from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee campus, here are tonight's moderators.
And good evening and welcome. I am Charles Benson with today's TMJ4.
And I'm Shannon Sims with today's TMJ4. The primary election is August 14th.
I'm Mitch Teich from WUWM. The candidates are already on stage, so let's meet them in alphabetical order. Wisconsin State Superintendent of Public Instruction Tony Evers. Former chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, Matt Flynn. Former executive director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, Mike McCabe.
The president of the Professional Firefighters of Wisconsin, Malin Mitchell. Political newcomer, Josh Pade. Former state representative, Kelda Royce.
We also welcome to the stage Madison Mayor Paul Soglin, as well as State Senator Kathleen Vineout. All right, there will be only one and only one time to applaud the candidates, and that is now. So let's give everyone a big round of applause.
These are the rules for tonight. Candidates will have 60 seconds to respond to a question. There will be 30 seconds for any follow-up. And if candidates run over their time limit, you will hear.
Before each category, we will ask a simple yes or no question. No words are needed. All we will need is a show of hands. And that's where we are going to start right now. Here is your first question as we talk about the economy. Who on this stage would kill or stop the Foxconn deal? And we have Ms. Vineout, Mr. Soglin, we have Ms. Royce, we have Mr. McCabe, and Mr. Flynn.
Who would renegotiate the Foxconn deal? Mr. Evers, Mr. Mitchell, Ms. Royce, Ms. Vineout, and Mr. Soglin all agree.
How many support it as it is? And we're going to let the record reflect, because we have an audience on radio, and we want to let everybody know no one raised their hand. We will begin with Mr. Evers. Foxconn's Louis Wu says three things are for sure: $10 billion investment, 13,000 jobs, an average pay of about $54,000 a year. Do you believe him and the company? And what could you change that the company is not already doing to make it a better deal?
First of all, it was the worst deal on record. Scott Walker, any of us on stage, anybody in the audience here, frankly, could have cut a better deal than Scott Walker did. The issues around Foxconn are severe. We go across any place in the state of Wisconsin outside of southeast Wisconsin, they'll be saying, so what's in it for us? And I think that's a reasonable question. Now, it is part of state law. I believe that it's going to be very difficult to stop it. Issues around, but I do believe we can renegotiate several issues. First one is we for $5 billion, $4 billion, we should be able to compel that company to be the best corporate partner in Wisconsin. Living wages, good fringe benefits. We also have to make sure we can renegotiate this deal as it relates to environmental issues. Obviously, Scott Walker sold the farm on that issue. We need to do that. The last thing is we need to make sure that people of color owners, women owners, have an opportunity to be part of this program.
All right.
Mr. Flynn, you're next. In October of 2017, you said this about Foxconn, quote, "I will live up to all contractual commitments. I'm not looking to sabotage anything." You now claim the deal is illegal and you will sue to stop it. So you've changed your position. Why?
Are you addressing this to me? The fact is that I'm the only one on this podium that knows how to stop the Foxconn deal, and that's a central part of my campaign. It's a crooked deal. $4.5 billion to a foreign company that was socializing their risk and privatizing their profit. They have a questionable past. Tony, you can't get people just to renegotiate when they have their hooks in us that bad. It's criminal negligence on the part of Scott Walker. I will go to federal court An illegal contract is unenforceable in Wisconsin. This is an illegal contract because it's a private bill that exempts them from our wetlands, it exempts them from environmental impact statements, it even exempts them from our Court of Appeals jurisdiction. They got everything they wanted. And we are paying a foreign company $4.5 billion to pollute Lake Michigan. And I'm not going to stand for that. I'm going to go in and shut them down. When they say average wage of $53,000, if Bill Gates is standing next to a homeless person, they have an average net worth of $40 billion. That's because Bill is worth $80 billion. It's a sneaky, crooked deal.
Mr. Flynn, you state that it's illegal due to the fact of the wetlands. However, PolitiFact Wisconsin rated that claim false just yesterday by stating that while, yes, the state has given some allowances to Foxconn, they are required to pay a $2 million in lieu for every wetland they take. They're supposed to give a ratio of 2. So that is incorrect.
You're mistaken about what you just said. It has nothing to do with whether there's other things they have to do. They are exempt from our present wetlands laws, period. That was not PolitiFact. And the fact of the matter is that the environmental impact statement, the wetlands laws, and the Court of Appeals jurisdiction are all private bills in their favor.
The DNR would say otherwise.
Mr. McCabe, a question for you. Milwaukee is the biggest economic engine in the state. You have called for lowering the sales tax by ½ cent, but expanding it to include goods and services that are now exempt. Milwaukee's mayor, Tom Barrett, wants a ½ cent sales tax to fund fire and police. Would you give that to him and any other city that might need it?
We've got a tax system right now. If you look at all the state and local taxes we pay in Wisconsin, combine them all. The wealthiest 1% in our state pays the lowest overall tax rate. They pay the smallest percentage of their incomes in overall state and local taxes. That's got to change. We don't need any new taxes, but we sure as heck got to make sure that everybody pays the ones we've already got. And so it's not a matter of raising tax rates. It's about making sure that everybody is paying the taxes that we have, and they aren't able to escape taxation by exploiting loopholes and exemptions in the law. So yeah, I think we can actually slightly lower our state sales tax, giving a tax break for regular working people, but close loopholes that can make sure that the wealthiest in our state pay their fair share. That's my approach. I want to make sure that all of us pay our fair share in taxes in Wisconsin.
So just to clarify, if the mayor of Milwaukee or any other city came to you and said, I'd like you to support a ½ cent sales tax to fund fire and police, you would say, no, but we're going to close these other loopholes. There
are already opportunities to have a local sales tax for counties. I'm simply saying the state sales tax, which I would have control over as governor, can be lowered a little bit from 5% to 4.5%, but making sure that the sales tax base is expanded by closing loopholes that the wealthiest in our society are currently exploiting to escape taxation. That's wrong. That's got to stop.
Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell.
Yes.
As more companies locate outside of city centers, the issue of how to get employees to and from work becomes more pressing. How should the state balance the need for more roads and the need for mass transit?
Well, we should have actually taken $810 million for the high-speed rail. That would have connected from Milwaukee to Madison and eventually would have went to Minneapolis and Chicago. We didn't do that. If I'm governor, we're going to fight like hell to bring that money back. We need to set up a regional transit authority. If we're going to have Foxconn come in here and pay $4.5 billion, and we're going to pay them $4.5 billion to actually do business here in the state of Wisconsin, we need to make sure that those that are underemployed and those that are unemployed can get to those jobs. That means people that are not far from here, right on the north side of Milwaukee. That means people in Racine that I've talked to that won't even be able to get to Foxconn need to be able to get to those jobs. And we can do that by setting up a regional transit authority. We've had it before in the southeastern part of the state. We need to set up a regional transit authority, make Foxconn pay for it, and make sure all those jobs, if Foxconn's promising 3,000 to 13,000 jobs, which we don't quite know what it's going to be, make sure those jobs are not going to folks here in Illinois, but going to folks right here in Wisconsin. And we need to make sure that people can get to those jobs. And you talk about a regional transit authority, what we should have done. Talgo was going to build trains right here in the north side of Milwaukee. We need to bring them back. I'm sorry.
Mr. Pate, the governor is basically the CEO of Wisconsin. His or her #1 job is to create economic opportunities. You're also responsible for managing a $76 billion budget. What proven results do you have that show that you're ready for this job?
Thank you, and it's great to be here tonight. I have had tremendous opportunity from a young age to manage big projects and to go in and do big things. I lost my father when I was young and had to support my family by getting into management. And I was given a tremendous opportunity to travel around the state and work for a family grocery company, managing large amounts of employees and large expansion projects, different contractors and vendors, and managing that. After law school, I went to Washington, D.C. and worked on Capitol Hill and worked on big policy proposals, managing programs that were in the billions of dollars. I wrote different ways of managing implementation of things like Dodd-Frank and TARP, which are in hundreds of billions of dollars. And finally, just working in the private sector and working in public advocacy across the United States and across the world, frankly, I was able to understand how to manage different policies and procedures and how to bring in talent from all different areas in order to achieve the results that we need to achieve. The governor, like you said, as a chief executive, needs to set the large goal and bring the people together to make it happen.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pate.
I'm going to follow up on that if I can. But why governor? Why see governor as an entry-level position as opposed to a lower elected office?
So for me, I don't see it as an entry-level position. I'm not a career politician. I don't see going to run for governor as going from a linear track of government service. I see it as someone who's had a tremendous experience of living throughout the state of Wisconsin, and as governor, being able to listen and understand the needs of all of our different communities. We're talking about Foxconn, which is a tremendous impact on southeastern Wisconsin, the southeastern Wisconsin economy. How can we connect what's going on in southeastern Wisconsin to northwestern Wisconsin, to northeastern Wisconsin? We need a governor who has a vision to make that happen.
Question now for Ms. Royce. Welcome. A recent study by the Urban Manufacturing Alliance showed that a majority of the manufacturers in the city of Milwaukee have 10 or fewer employees. How should the state weigh the needs of a few large employers versus the needs of many small employers?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having us this evening. I'm a small business owner, and we know that small businesses are really the true job creators. They're the engine of our economy. They create the vast majority of net new jobs in any economy. For the last 3 years, Wisconsin has been dead last in creating new businesses. I think it is essential that we have a governor who has a long-term plan for economic development that includes sectors like manufacturing that are so core and critical to Wisconsin's economy. As a small business owner myself, I know that by supporting small businesses, we are going to put our state in the very best position to create jobs that can actually support a family. There are a lot of politicians who want to give our money away in big corporate welfare deals like Foxconn. But ultimately, we can't pay companies to create jobs. We have to make investments that are going to yield not just family-supporting jobs, but companies that are actually going to grow in Wisconsin, companies like mine and thousands of other companies across the state.
Well, does that mean that the state should not necessarily pursue the large employers, the Foxconns out there?
No, absolutely not. As a business owner, I want Wisconsin to be the very best place to grow a business. I think we're a great place to do business. And I welcome any company, large or small, who wants to start here or grow here, whether it's a family farmer or somebody opening a Main Street cafe or somebody with an innovative tech idea. As long as you pay your taxes and follow our laws, we welcome you and we want to make you thrive.
Thanks.
Mr. Soglin, Governor Walker said after you jumped into the governor's race, quote, "The last thing we need is more Madison in our lives." You have criticized the governor for giving away too much in the Foxconn deal. Where do you draw the line? What is fair and reasonable to subsidize new jobs?
Let me start out by outlining the fact that there's 3 stages to solving a problem. There is describing the problem, there is offering a solution, and then there's implementation. Now, we can have several standards. For example, I recently negotiated an agreement in Madison where the employer is going to provide a $15 an hour minimum wage for every employee, health insurance, and a pension. We're doing it through a jobs-creating TIF, and that is going to be a public commitment of $6,000 per employee. We should recover that within 4 or 5 years. Now, if you go to the SBA, they have a recommendation that for deals like Foxconn, $50,000 is the maximum for a manufacturing job. We're looking at what is minimally $350,000. The governor does not know what he's doing. We'd like to know what he was smoking when he negotiated this deal. In China, they're laughing at us.
All right, well, if you had put $15,000 on the table for Foxconn, you would have lost that deal.
And there's nothing wrong with that because, as other candidates here have pointed out, the creation of great quality jobs comes from small businesses. It does not come, and states suffer terribly when they get into a race to the bottom, handing out these hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in public money where we take the risk and they take the profit. They are laughing at us in China.
All right, Mrs. Vinehout. The Milwaukee Bucks will phase in a $15 minimum wage for service sector workers in the new arena by 2023 as part of a good faith effort to win over public funding for that arena. What would you set as a living wage across the state as governor?
I would say that $15 an hour is a great place to start. We need to index the living wage to inflation. And if you think about the history of Wisconsin, we have a very long history in having a living wage. We weren't the first, but we were one of the first states to develop a living wage way back in 1913. And although it was tied up in the Supreme Court for several decades, eventually we created our own council, and that living wage was reevaluated by the council to make sure it actually matched the costs that folks have to live. And when I think about what I would push as governor, I would bring back that council and I would put in place $15 an hour, phase it in, follow some of the other states around us. For example, Minnesota did. Saw a booming economy in Minnesota. When you think about people that are at the minimum wage, they spend everything they have, which spurs our economy.
All right, so just to be correct, you like the model by what the Bucks are doing and could see a phase into $15?
Yes.
All right. Let's move on to justice reform. Again, this will be a yes or just a hand-raised question. Governor Doyle started an early release program to reduce prison population. When Governor Walker took office, he ended it. How many of you would support an early release program? Unanimous. Everyone agrees. Okay, we are now going to move right to left. So Ms. Vinehout, this question is for you. One way to reduce prison population is through treatment, alternative, and diversion programs for nonviolent offenders. You want taxpayers to fully fund TAD programs. How much are we talking about, and where would this money come from?
Thank you for asking. I have written 4 alternatives to the governor's budget, and in each of them, I have fully funded the treatment, alternatives, and diversion program. The answer to your question is $20 million right now to fully fund it, and it would come from a variety of sources. And just one small example of the things I haven't bought in the alternative budget to the governor was the roughly $22 million in the budget to wealthy folks who put their kids to private schools and can write that off on their income tax. So that's a specific example. This is a hugely successful program. Recently, one of the county supervisors in my home county in Buffalo County told me about a man picked up for a 2nd or 3rd OWI. And when the drug counselor asked him, "Why do you drink a quart of vodka a day?" he said, "Because my teeth hurt." And the drug counselor got him to a dentist. They pulled all his teeth. He got antibiotics, and now he is sober.
All right.
Mr. Soglin, the role of childhood trauma or toxic stress in a child's life has been linked to a host of problems later on, from dropping out of school to addiction issues, even to cancer. What steps would you take to reduce Wisconsin's high rate of childhood trauma?
Well, first of all, let's recognize that there are 5 critical areas that are essential if we are going to have healthy communities, sustainable families. Housing first, transportation, quality health care. We have to address quality child care and, of course, education. Now, we've come to understand that trauma, violence, is actually a matter of health. It is to be treated like a disease. And so there are a number of steps that we can take. The first thing we do is we don't turn our back on federal funds that are available for our health system. The second thing we do is we set up access to public health facilities throughout the state of Wisconsin. Part of the problem is not just Affordable Care Act not being accessible, but it is also the cost of health, which is a deterrent to so many families within our state. Community health centers that have public and private support is the answer.
Thank you.
Ms. Royce, Attorney General Brad Schimel, who is running for re-election, is calling your goal of cutting prison population in half, quote, irresponsible, misleading, and a potential threat to public safety. Department of Corrections says 67% of the 23,000 in prison are violent offenders. How can you cut the prison population if more than half are violent offenders?
Charles, the real threat to public safety is the backlog of untested rape kits that our Attorney General Brad Schimel has sat on as he prints commemorative coins to help pat himself on the back. We need our criminal justice system to accomplish two main aims: public safety and just punishment. Right now, we're spending an ocean of money. It is bankrupting us morally and financially, and it is accomplishing neither of those aims. As governor, I will look to our neighboring state of Minnesota. They incarcerate fewer than half as many people as we do, and yet they're no more dangerous. In fact, they're actually investing in public safety. We can do that. There are people sitting in prison for decades who were sentenced under previous regimes by judges who sentenced them taking into consideration that they would be let out and paroled. Now, Governor Walker has refused to do his responsible duty as governor and has just let people languish in prison. That means we are making ourselves less safe when they finally do come out.
So give me an idea. What kind of violent offenders would you release?
It's not about who we're releasing. It's about making sure that people receive just punishment for their crime, but that we're giving them the tools to actually be successfully reintegrated once they come out of prison. Most of the people who are sitting in prison are there for crimes that in other states, they might be getting much shorter sentences for. But if they're sitting in prison for decades, we're spending money that we're not actually getting back. We have to set people up for success with safe housing, with a job when they come out, and with counseling to help them with substance use disorder.
Mr. Pate, a person who commits a nonviolent crime can have that conviction scrubbed from their record after they've served their time. Wisconsin's expungement laws are said to be among the strictest in the nation. What specific reforms would you seek in how the state treats expungement?
Thank you. I think we need to have a full scope, comprehensive plan to reform our criminal justice system. That begins with making certain that people aren't going to prison that don't have to go to prison, low-level drug offenders, making certain that people aren't going to a life of crime by having other opportunities in their life, handling the prison population, and then handling people who are on release and then get put back into the prison. Wisconsin has a terrible record of how we reintegrate people into society, and that means getting rid of the way or reinstating the way our parole system works, and also fixing the way that we rehab people and give them opportunities to reintegrate back into society.
So one of the big problems with the Wisconsin expungement law is the fact that it has to be done at sentencing, where in most states it can be done after sentencing. Would you support a law, or would you support a bill where either the age was increased or that expungement could be addressed after sentencing?
Absolutely. I think when you look at the fact of expungement, it means that you're giving someone a true fresh start, that they've truly changed their lives. And we have to have the kind of fairness and hope to people that did something bad in their life or were incriminated and they came out. It shouldn't be determined at that point. It should be determined as they get rehabbed into society. And I'm in favor of that.
Mr. Mitchell, in this election year, Governor Walker has set a 5-year timeline to close the troubled Lincoln Hills juvenile facility and to replace it with regional youth centers. What's your assessment of that timeline, and what specific methods would you seek to rehabilitate young offenders?
Well, I think the timeline's horrible. He's doing it now because he's in an election year. But when we talk about criminal justice reform, it doesn't escape me that I'm raising 2 black kids in the worst state to do so. And when you think about that, that is a problem. That's not a Democrat problem. That's not a Republican problem. That's our problem as Wisconsinites. We have the highest African-American male incarceration rate in the country. So we need to do something about that. And we're not doing anything about that. So I want to end truth in sentencing. I would actually bring juveniles back to regional facilities. We should have done that years ago. I want to make sure that we get rid of crimeless revocations. And you know, when we talk about these issues, a lot of people up here at this stage and this dais will talk about these issues, but you don't see a lot of these people when it comes to actually making real change when they're not running for election. So these things are serious issues that we have to tackle, and it's not a Republican or Democrat problem. It's a problem that we have here in the state of Wisconsin. We need to address it.
You said a 5-year timeline is a terrible timeline, I think.
Well, it's a terrible timeline because he's doing it now because he's running for re-election. So we have two Walkers. We have Governor Walker, who legislates and governs one way, and then we have candidate Walker, who is now acting like he's a moderate Republican. And the people of the state of Wisconsin are not going to be fooled by that again. So we see the difference in what happens when we have a governor that doesn't quite frankly give a crap about the people of the state of Wisconsin. And the people that in some of the worst zip codes we have here in our state are not being adequately addressed by anybody.
Thank you.
Mr. McCabe, former Governor Tommy Thompson wrote an op-ed piece calling on the state to convert a prison to house the Second Chance Skills Initiative to train prisoners with job and life skills. Do you support training prisoners so they can transition to the workforce when released?
Of course. We need to have an approach that, first of all, our goal should be to cut our prison population in half, and we can do that. It's a realistic and achievable goal because Minnesota has imprisoned half as many people as Wisconsin, and the two states have virtually identical crime rates. So imprisoning twice as many people and just warehousing them the way Wisconsin is now hasn't reduced crime. It's just doomed us to a state budget that spends more on prisons than the entire university system. Wisconsin is literally spending more locking people up than we spend unlocking the potential of our population. And that is not tough on crime. That is dumb on crime. And we have to take an approach where we simply don't lock people up and throw away the key, but we use alternative approaches to sentencing whenever possible. We invest in mental health and drug treatment. We take approaches that can get people out in society making constructive contributions.
But when you say cut in half, what's your timeline on that? I understand Minnesota has fewer people, but are you saying you get there by changing the sentencing, or do you change it by reducing the current number of people in prison?
No, one of the ways we have to do this is we got to stop locking up nonviolent offenders. We've got to use alternative approaches to sentencing. When somebody hasn't committed a violent act or damaged property, they don't belong behind bars. I have come out in favor of full legalization of marijuana, for example, because we got to stop locking up people who don't commit a violent act or damaged property. And then we've got to take all these other steps, like eliminating crimeless parole revocation. We've got to bring back a sensible pardon policy. We've got to take steps that will get us a lower prison population so that we can invest in the empowerment of our citizenry.
Mr. Flynn, 2 state Democratic lawmakers have asked you to drop out of the race because of your legal work defending the Milwaukee Archdiocese during the priest sexual abuse scandal. How can you ensure voters that you will protect public safety after being accused of, quote, participating in keeping the public in the dark about pedophile priest, unquote?
Well, I think you have to consider the source, and I've spoken about this many, many times. I'm very proud of my representation of the Archdiocese and of all my clients, and I think it shows a real misunderstanding of our legal system at all. We have lawyers in this country who represent clients. They don't necessarily have that in China or Russia or anywhere else, but all those people are trying to get into this country because of our freedoms. Now, in that particular case, I had 2 objectives. I never represented anybody, any of the priests who were accused of that, personally. Some people have said that I had, and it's false. What these 2 lawmakers did is regurgitate Republican lies that had started back in October, and both of them are part of an elite in the Democratic Party, just like there's an elite in the Republican Party. I'm going to take on both elites. When I'm the governor of this state, there's no elite in this state, Republican or Democrat, that's going to run the state or run this governor. And what happened was we cleaned it up. We gave settlements to the victims. It was a terrible thing that happened to them. And also, we put into effect procedures so it never happened again. The elites are on notice for me.
What if you had been asked to defend a priest who was accused of this? Would you have taken up that case?
Well, that's hypothetical. I had a great teacher once who said to me, Matt, never answer a question in the subjunctive mood. and so I'll decline this time. The truth is, I very rarely turn down any client because I think people are entitled to defense, but I was not asked to do that, and it was not something I had to face. I will say that Quarles & Brady, my law firm, is one of the great law firms in the country. I have an AV rating from Martindale-Hubbell for competence and ethics, so is my firm, and people like to come to us for good, honest, ethical defense.
Mr. Evers, appreciate your waiting through all of these questions.
It's great listening.
The multiracial interfaith organization MICA launched a campaign in 2011 to cut the state prison population by half, from 22,000 to 11,000. It now sits at 23,000. Do you support that original goal, and how would you balance reducing the prison population and protecting public
Absolutely,
safety?
and that's a goal that's worth accomplishing. This isn't about being soft on crime. I know that's what Attorney General Schimmel is trying to make this about. It's being smart on crime and diversions, making sure that people that haven't committed violent crimes are put into diversion programs, making sure that people that are arrested for drug issues get into drug court. We have to stop incarcerating people for nonviolent crimes. That's the bottom line. And this is a pretty easy one, to be honest with you. All we have to do is look at some red states across this country. I'll use Texas as an example, for gosh sakes. Who would think I'd be talking about something good that's happening there? But they've closed prisons, and every dollar that they have put into rehabilitation has saved $9. You talk about what the cost, how we save money, or how we get money for this. We start rehabilitating people instead of incarcerating people. I think that's a critical issue that we need to look at.
Would you support compassionate release for those who are incarcerated, who have committed nonviolent drug crimes, but are sick and ailing in our prison system?
Yeah, that is, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel has talked about that a lot. You think about the expense of putting someone that absolutely is not going to commit any kind of crime once they leave the prison system. Having them outside of the prison system, being taken care of, is critically important. It's good for them, but frankly, it's going to save us money. Incarcerating people that are on their last legs is not where we should be in this state.
Well, this is the point in the debate where we now turn the questions over to you. Our candidates will have a chance to ask the candidate next to them a question. You'll have 15 seconds to ask the question and 60 seconds to respond to a question. So, Mr. Evers, you get to ask Mr. Flynn your favorite question.
My favorite question is this, Matt, and we just talked about it. I believe the people of the state of Wisconsin want to be assured that they're treated with respect if they disagree with you. When you're challenged on various issues that we've talked about already, that you've talked about, telling people that they can jump in the lake, telling people directly attacking people. So the question is, can the people of Wisconsin count on you to treat them with respect?
Nobody in this panel has served in the military except me, so I'm going to tell you this. Real quick. The people that have attacked me from the elite in the Democratic Party, our enemy is Act 10, corrupt government and poisoned water. A soldier or a sailor does not frag his general or his admiral from behind. When they do that, the general and the admiral has to turn to them, and this is not a nice response. It's don't do it. And that was my response. I'm a very affable guy, and anybody has some ideas to say to me, I'm happy to answer them. But I will not tolerate, in a Democratic Party, I was the chairman, people fragging their commanding officers from behind. That's what happened. I've said this to the Republican Party as well, that you're alluding to the jump in the lake policy. Usually you leave no fingerprints, so it's very nice that you're as candid as you are right now. Here's what it is. Let's be blunt. When the Republicans hit me on Act 10, I said, you jump in the lake. When these two drive-by artists over in Madison, jump in the lake.
All right, you get to now ask Mr. Evers a question. Try to keep it to 15 seconds.
Thank you.
Here we go.
You and I have a friendly disagreement on an issue. I will kill the Foxconn deal. You don't think it can be killed. I have substantial litigation experience. You have no commercial litigation experience. Isn't it true that what you were doing is simply repeating what you were told by somebody else?
No. It's obvious what the issues are. The issues are it's a horrible deal. The issues are we have to make sure that given this horrible deal, what can we do best for the people of Wisconsin? And that includes making sure that minority owners and women owners and apprentices have an opportunity for a good paying job. That's what it's about, making sure that we take care of the environmental issues that they're left to do. We do have control over these people. It's not like we're going to give them, we're giving them way too much money, and it's going to impact our budget. But the bottom line is, we have to have a plan B. I can't sit up here and tell the people of Wisconsin, oh, by the way, this isn't going to happen. We're already there, and we have to make sure, since we're already there, that the people of Wisconsin are treated fairly and that we don't make the same mistake again. Thank you.
Mr. McCabe, you now have the privilege of asking Mr. Mitchell a question.
Be easy now, be easy.
Malin, one of our major differences is that I'm not taking any single donation over $200, even though state law says that candidates for governor can take as much as $20,000 from an individual or $86,000 from a special interest group's political action committee. My question is, would you support updating our state conflict of interest law that's in Wisconsin's ethics code to disqualify elected officials from taking any action benefiting donors who've given over $1,000 to an elected official or spent over that much or more on advertising benefiting that elected official?
Well, that's a loaded question, and if we're talking about campaign finance reform, I am in total agreement with you that we need to restructure our campaign finance laws, because there are too many lobbyists, there are too many special interests that are getting a seat at the table, and I can tell you that the majority of the 5.7 million people in the state do not have a lobbyist, and they have no special interest, and they're hurting. So there's no doubt in my mind that we need to totally reform our campaign finance laws. We had the Government Accountability Board. The current administration has got rid of that. Now we have the Ethics Commission, but the Government Accountability Board was actually there to oversee elections, and they have now gotten away from that. We used to be a state that had clean government and clean elections, and if I'm your governor, I'm going to make sure we get back to that.
All right, Mr. Mitchell, you have 15 seconds to ask him a question.
So, Mike, I actually had 3 questions.
Only one.
I only get one? So we're doing a statewide Badger beer tour, where we're actually getting around the entire state. We're in Hudson, we're in Rhinelander, we're in Merrill, we're in Superior, all across this state. And you talk about the rural areas a lot, which are great. And we're there, and I actually believe that those in rural areas have a lot of the same things in common as every Wisconsinite in the state. I'm trying to bring people together.
The question, please.
I was talking about myself for a little bit here.
You were. The question.
How do you intend to bring the state together and actually have an urban-rural divide? But that's not my question. My question is, what is your favorite beer?
My favorite beer is Spotted Cow. All right. But as to, I've had the blessing of
that's not being able. I asked.
I've had the blessing of being able to live out in the country and also in the city. I've straddled those two worlds, and I'll tell you, for all the talk of the rural-urban divide, we've got more in common. Rural and urban people got more in common than we've been told.
Yeah.
And you know, I grew up on a dairy farm. I come from a farming background. That shaped me. But I'll tell you this: when I go out to rural areas, one of the things I say is that we cannot be successful as a state if our biggest city, the engine of our economy, is struggling or failing. Mm-hmm. Now, so many people have demonized Milwaukee, and so many people have tried to divide and conquer rural and urban people. We've got to go out to rural areas and say Milwaukee's got to succeed if Wisconsin's going to succeed, and likewise, rural Wisconsin's got to succeed if Wisconsin's going to be what it has the potential to be.
We'll leave it at that.
McCabe.
Mr. Pade, it is up to you to ask a question of 15 seconds or less to Ms. Royce.
Thank you. Ms. Royce, you've been such an advocate for women's rights, and I have been surprised at how little that has been asked of us as candidates.
Oh, thank you.
So you have some great ideas and great proposals, things that I agree with, and I think things that need to be a priority for the next governor. So I want to give you the minute to talk about what we can do for women in Wisconsin.
Thank you so much for the question. I've been a champion for women's rights throughout my whole career. I'm a mom and a stepmom of 4 girls, and I cannot believe the type of peril that we are facing right now, where it looks like my daughters might have fewer rights than my mother and my grandmother. We have a President Trump who is hell-bent on appointing an anti-choice justice that will provide the 5th vote on our Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade. And a lot of people don't realize that in Wisconsin right now on the books, we have a criminal abortion ban that criminalizes women and doctors and makes abortion illegal. As governor, I will continue to work to overturn that cruel law, but I've also pledged that I will pardon anyone charged under that law. We are not going to let our daughters go back to a time when abortion was illegal and a crime and women could not get the health care they need.
And Ms. Royce, your turn to ask Mr. Pate a question.
Thank you. So Josh, Mr. Pate, excuse me, in 2010, I had the privilege of being in the State Assembly and in the leadership as we helped to fight against Act 10. Senator Vineout was in the Senate, and she left the state so that we would have a time to hear from Wisconsin families how they were going to be negatively affected.
Question, please.
Question is, when working families across Wisconsin had their economic security on the line, how did you help stand up for us all in that fight?
Thank you. You know, I have families and friends who are teachers across the state of Wisconsin, and it was extremely frustrating to be sitting in a law library studying half the country away while this was happening. And, you know, I was calling people and telling them and advocating that we can't leave our teachers behind. We can't leave our hardworking families behind. And then, you know, I went to D.C., so it's a different set of issues, but I dedicated myself to advocating for the kind of policies and policies that would help our working families throughout the state of Wisconsin. We're all in this together, whether you're a public employee, a private employee, a hardworking mom, a factory worker, a lawyer, and we need to advocate for each other, and I've been continuing to do that.
Thank you.
All right, we can now move on to Mr. Soglin. You will be able to ask Ms. Vineout a question.
Thank you. I'd like to know your opinion on the following. You just heard Mike McCabe say that he would not take a single contribution over $200. But it's my understanding that he would take multiple contributions from the same individual of $200. 5 $200 contributions for 1,000. That's a very different perspective.
Question,
how do you
please.
feel about that?
Well, I think with campaign finance, it's extremely important that we have disclosure. And right now, Mr. McCabe has to disclose all of his donations, and anybody can add them up and figure out who gave him money. Unfortunately, that disclosure was taken away for something we call dark money, which is money going into issue advocacy groups. When I was in the Senate, we passed a law to take the veil off of those groups. Unfortunately, it didn't get through the whole process. It did pass the Senate. I think we need to bring back that law, because right now, the amount of money that the candidates are getting is small compared to the amount of money that's being spent by these groups that no one knows who who's donating to them.
Ms. Vineout, you now have an opportunity to ask Mr. Soglin a question.
Thanks. As you know, I come from beautiful Buffalo County in western Wisconsin. It was a part of the state, as many parts of the state, that didn't turn out much in 2016 like we needed to. Let's say that you are the Democratic nominee to go up against Scott Walker. How would you, as the mayor of Madison, convince the folks in my neighborhood that they need to vote for you versus staying home or voting for the, God forbid, voting for the governor?
Well, first of all, let me say that when I asked Sarah Soglin what she thought of my running for governor, the first words out of her mouth was, "You can do it, but you better win." And so I went about doing a poll, not one of these push-pull polls, not a name identification poll, but a poll that set up the framework of what a campaign would look like. And we asked the tough questions, the kind of things that Scott Walker would say about me in particular. For example, that I was an opponent to the war in Vietnam when I was in college. He'd raise up the question of my age. He'd raise up the question of the fact that I gave the key to the city to Fidel Castro. And he would call me a tax and spend liberal. And we found in that poll that the voters approved statewide with a majority. So I think the important thing is to get out there, campaign, listen to the people of the state.
Thank you, Mr. Soglin. Thank you, all candidates.
All right, so we're now going to turn to education, and our next quick question by a show of hands. How many on this panel would support free tuition for in-state students to attend two-year colleges or technical schools? I see every hand except for Mr. Evers. So the first question, we are again going from right to left. This is a question for Ms. Vineout. Tuition at state universities is currently frozen. If you are elected governor, how would you balance the cost of a public education with the cost of hiring and retaining top-notch faculty?
Right now, the university has been devastated, and many professors are being poached by other universities. What has happened is that the governor has hit the university twice by freezing tuition and by making very deep cuts in the state aid. I would, as governor, I would bring back the money that was taken away. I would put $100 million into needs-based financial aid. I also have a bill that would fully fund the free tuition for two-year and tech colleges, for the two-year UW campuses. We must also lift up the professors and the work that's being done. We need to bring back tenure to the statutes. We need to bring back shared governance, and the legislature must respect and honor, as well as the governor, must respect and honor the work of the professors and the work of the UW. The UW is the engine that drives our state, and we must invest in the UW for our state to do well.
Thank you.
Mr. Soglin. Wisconsin has a housing authority to help first-time home buyers with low-cost loans. Do you support Democratic efforts to create a separate authority to help the hundreds of thousands of state students who might want to refinance at a lower rate?
You're asking if we're going to support refinancing their student loans?
And creating a separate authority to do that.
I'm not sure that a separate authority is necessary. WIDA, which existed long before Scott Walker came into office, was a very functional and outstanding agency. It continues to be probably the best agency under his administration since he's taken office. Now, he's combined it with the Economic Development Authority, which everyone knows is a headache and doesn't function. So I would suggest that what we do, and what I would do as governor, is I would go in there, I would meet with the staff, the career people, the people who know what they're doing. And those are the folks you should listen to in terms of organizational structure. We also have to deal with the culture of the organization. We also have to do with the technical skills of the people. But I'm not going to make a commitment now as to whether or not I would do a reorganization.
No, I'm asking, I'm sorry, if to refinance loans. The question is about refinancing loans and whether you would establish a separate authority for that. How would you go about?
I'm saying I would want to look at the present structure of the organization and decide what is the best thing to do. I'm sorry, I mean, we've got a very difficult, challenging situation with that authority right now, particularly the bad parts of it in terms of economic development. We just had a loan that was written up in the papers today, $1.5 million just gone from another one of Scott Walker's bad deals. No, I would want to be in there. I'd want to speak and listen to the people who are in charge of that function of government.
Ms. Royce, you have said after 27 years that the Choice Voucher School program has failed us, and you would end it. Explain, though, what you would say to the parents of 27,000 children here in Milwaukee who no longer would have that option.
Well, those 27,000 children would have the option. They would continue their education. We cannot allow students who are currently in those voucher schools to have their education disrupted. They can complete it up until the time that school ends. That's the only responsible way to address it. But we should not be allowing new voucher students to be entering those schools, and we have to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. I'm the product of public schools. My kids are in public school, and I believe that public dollars are for public education, period. We need to invest in our public education system. And the problem with privatization is that it takes the resources out of the public schools, and the kids who are remaining in public schools who didn't get cherry picked out for their backpack full of cash are still left there. If we want Wisconsin to succeed economically, we've got to invest in our kids, and that means our public education system.
So if I understand you correctly, if you could eliminate it, you would, but you would allow the children to finish through the school year and no new voucher program applicants?
No, not the school year, throughout their schooling. So if they're in elementary school, 5th grade. If they're in high school, they can graduate. We are going to not disrupt anyone or take anybody out of school. That's the responsible way to do it. We can't disrupt families, but we also have to stop sending our public taxpayer dollars to these private, unaccountable black box schools.
Mr. Pade, several Midwest states give tax deductions or tax credits to parents who send their kids to private schools. In 2013, Governor Walker gave families the option to deduct up to $10,000. What would that program look like, or would it end under a Pade administration?
Thank you. Education is extremely important to me. I wasn't given the opportunity to have a traditional education growing up, so the value of having a public education is the fabric of our society, and it's the core of what Wisconsin needs to restore. Specifically towards the tax credits, I come from, my grandparents were, Italian Catholics, and my aunts and uncles all went to St. Joe's High School in Kenosha. So offering a tax credit for people that want to keep that tradition alive, I think, is something that should be preserved. I think we need to look and ensure that we're not doing it at the expense of public education.
Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah.
You have something in common with Governor Walker. You both.
We have great hair.
You both graduated from Delavan High School. This year, the Delavan School Board decided to close an elementary school and cut teachers after voters decided against raising taxes. If you're governor, where do schools go if they need more money?
Well, first of all, Charles, I will tell you, you are right. Me and Scott Walker did attend the same high school. He's 10 years older than I am, but we obviously took some different classes and learned some different lessons. But I will tell you, under a Mitchell administration, we will pass a constitutional amendment that will actually fully fund public education once and for all. So we don't have to keep going back to referendums. I actually got to go back to my alma mater, Delavan High School. Scott Walker was there the year prior, so maybe Walworth County's changing. We'll see. But I got to actually go and talk to my high school, and 2 questions I got were from kids who were talking about the referendum. Having schools have to pass a referendum just to pay for operational costs is no way for us to take care of our kids. I have 2 kids. I have a son, a freshman in high school, and a daughter that's a sophomore in UW Oshkosh. Our greatest chance for our future is our children, so we have to fully fund it. So I will pass a constitutional amendment to make sure we fully fund our education once and for all.
All right, under that Constitution, would you then eliminate the option for schools to go to a referendum?
No, I would not. I would actually restore. I would make sure we would pass the constitutional amendment. We would pay 2/3 of every public schools district's budget, and then they would have the opportunity to do that, because I will actually, in my budget, also restore local control back to municipalities, back to towns, back to cities, and back to school districts, because school districts and towns and villages know what's best for their constituency. The local elected officials have a job to do. They're elected to actually take care of their local people. So I would actually restore back.
School referendum stays in place then?
Certainly.
Mr. McCabe, in 2016, you wrote in the Cap Times, quote, "The less education is pondered on Capitol Hill and in state capitals, the better off our schools will be." Are you advocating for school boards that they should take on their own budgets and that the state should stay out the way?
No, but I think the best thing that we could do for local schools is keep state and national politicians as far away from them as possible and give local communities decision-making authority again. Since 2011, over 130 laws have been made in Wisconsin taking away local decision-making authority on a breathtaking range of issues. And local school boards have had their hands tied. The state should be a partner in adequately funding education. And, we should have a basic rule for government. If a program works, keep it and fund it. If a program doesn't work, get rid of it. By that standard, Wisconsin should stop trying to fund 2 separate and parallel systems of education. I think we should eliminate taxpayer-subsidized private schooling, the voucher program. It is 27 years old. It has not lived up to its promises. It has not done what it was supposed to do. So let's reinvest our resources in our community schools, but give those community schools the freedom to make some decisions again.
Thank you.
Mr. Flynn, the Arena Elementary School in rural Iowa County closed in May because it does not have enough students or money. Despite a bump in school aid from Governor Scott Walker, how would you balance school funding for shrinking rural schools and the growing needs of city schools?
Right. In the rural areas in this state, there are shrinking populations and there are shrinking school populations. At the same time, a school, particularly a high school, can be the identity of a community. So somebody whom I respect a great deal, Maury Andrews, who probably knows about as much as school funding and school issues as anybody in the state, came up with an interesting idea, and that is that school districts can join and consolidate for certain services, busing, business administration, that kind of thing, but still keep their separate identities with various athletic teams and so on. So I'm very conscious of keeping the identities of small communities in this state, but we're going to have to revise the funding formula, first of all. Secondly, I think the state is going to have to directly fund certain things like special education. If a youngster's family moves into a district who needs a great deal of services, that can just bust the budget of a local school district, and that isn't fair. That should be overridden and taken by the state. Thank you.
Mr. Evers, you'll have the final question here. You and Governor Walker pledged to work together to improve reading proficiency among Wisconsin students. Reading test scores have not improved. They've gone down in spite of this bipartisan consensus. What's gone wrong?
I have to answer my no question first quickly. You asked me about higher education funding. I believe students should have some skin in the game. Any student that is so impoverished that they can't afford to go to college, of course they're going to get some grants. But the bottom line is I think there should be some skin in the game for kids going to college. And I think that impacts directly our independent and private colleges in the state. If we go tuition free statewide in the public sector, the Northlands of this world, the Silver Lakes of this world will go away. So the question you talked about was the Read to Lead effort. That effort had very few, frankly, recommendations around it. It was about a test that we would give to teachers before they enter the profession. That test, the legislature took that away, so that was no longer an issue. The issue around reading is an issue around equitable funding in the state of Wisconsin. I'm sorry to do that, but you didn't give me a chance to answer my no question.
Thank you, Mr. Evers.
You bet.
The live television portion of tonight's debate has come to an end.
But the conversation does not stop here. We have another half hour on the radio and online where the candidates will answer questions that you have submitted.
You can also listen at WUWM 89.7 FM or watch the live stream on the Today's TMJ4 Facebook page and at tmj4.com. All right, I think we all got your attention. We want to let you know that the debate continues. And here's what we've done. For the past 2 weeks, we've been getting a lot of feedback from both viewers on Today's TMJ4 as well as listeners on WUWM FM.
They've been sharing their questions of what they would like us to ask you. And so we will pull a name from this bag, and then the question, the viewer question, will be posed to that person.
So the first question is for...
It's a grab bag.
My arms are too short.
There's no rabbit?
There is no rabbit.
The first question is for Josh Pade. This is a question from Phil in Racine, who would like to know, as governor, can you promise to provide the same access to treatment and fairness in the justice system to people who struggle with crack cocaine as those who struggle with opioid addiction? And if not, why not?
No, I think we need to treat all drug addiction equally. It's a terrible strain on families and communities, and right now we're under a opioid epidemic, so it's top of the news. But that doesn't preclude any sort of drug addiction problems. We need to be investing and ensure that people that have problems get treated, that we have mental health facilities, and finally that we also treat the opioid epidemic, because I think that all of that becomes interconnected. Once we start having a comprehensive plan to get people out of those problems, then we can end the epidemic that's going throughout our communities.
Thank you.
Malin Mitchell, your question. Here is a question from Dave. He would like to know if you're going to repeal Act 10, and specifically, do you think state employees are paying their fair share of health care and pension benefits?
First answer to the question is yes. If I could snap my fingers, if I was governor and we had a Democratic Senate and a Democratic Assembly, I would repeal Act 10 on day one. But the reality of it all is that Act 10 is currently law. And it's clear where I stood with Act 10. I marched, and we marched as firefighters every day with Act 10, and it's a horrible, draconian law. Act 10 is actually Janus on steroids. So yes, I would repeal Act 10. But we can't get into the argument about Act 10 and every other worker. I want to work for every worker in this state, because if we get into Act 10, then we're actually playing right in Governor Walker's lane, and that's what he loves, and that's what he wants, and I will not do that. But the second part of your question is, are state workers paying their fair share? Well, yes, state workers are, as well as local workers are, because collective bargaining is about coming to the table and sitting with your employer and talking about hours, wages, and working conditions. And in lieu of raises, a lot of times state workers, many times, actually in lieu of raises, actually did not get raises because they wanted health care to stay the same. So yes, they're paying their fair share. Matter of fact, they're paying twice and they're paying double what they should pay right now.
So you want to eliminate, if you can, you want to give them collective bargaining rights back again. So, but on the table, do you think that they would be required to pay their share of pension and health care?
Well, the law is that they already are required.
They are now.
And I'll tell you, as being a firefighter and being the president of the Professional Firefighters of Wisconsin, 98, not close to 100% of us are paying into the pension and into the health care when we are not required to do so. So most of us are already paying into our pension benefits, and majority of us are already paying a 10% share for our premiums. So what Scott Walker did with Act 10, it wasn't about money, it wasn't about filling a budget loophole, it was about him trying to cripple his political enemies, or any political enemies he may have. And it was just basically an attack on working families, and we got to end that.
All right, I will pull the next name from our grab bag. Ms. Vinehout. Communities are unable to invest in transportation on a regional basis, and political boundaries such as county lines have become challenging transportation barriers. One long identified solution has been the formation of regional transportation authorities, RTAs, bodies that allow communities to coordinate and raise money to invest in transportation. Will you support legislation that enables RTAs and gives more local control of transportation to our communities? This is from Barbara in Elm Grove.
Yes, not only will I support it, I introduced it. It was passed in the 2009 budget. We had a whole bunch of people in Eau Claire that spent 18 months planning the RTA, and the governor repealed it in 2011, and I reintroduced the bills to make it law. So I strongly support local transit communities coming together to form a regional transit authority. It needs to be done. It needs to be done all across the state.
Thank you, Ms. Vinehout.
All right, I'm going to draw another name here. And this is a question for Mr. Soglin. Luke from Scandinavia, we assume Scandinavia, Wisconsin, asks, who would be most comfortable standing up to President Trump? In April, Governor Walker called up 24 National Guardsmen and women to assist at securing the border of Arizona per the president's request. How would you respond to a similar request to secure the border?
Well, first of all, I would not allow President Trump to, in effect, nationalize our guards and send them out of state. That's the first thing. But more important than that, we've got a situation now, and I want to go and talk about milk prices for a moment and how that fits in with Scott Walker and our state and the economy. Scott Walker decided that he needed to set a record for milk production in this state, and so he provided financial incentive for some farmers. Sure enough, we did set a record for milk production in the state, and Scott Walker's got his new badge, and the farmers, of course, are going bankrupt because Scott Walker didn't understand the principles that 12-year-olds understand, which is the laws of supply and demand. So we've already got record milk producer bankruptcies in the western half of the state. Then comes the tariff wars. And if that wasn't enough, it's Harley-Davidson, it's the cheese industry,
all right, so
it's
you've
milk.
moved on to another question, but the question is pretty important there. You are the governor. If the governor is asked to call upon to help in a situation to secure the border, are you going to let that happen?
I'm going to tell him to go talk to Governor Christie. It's not going to happen on my watch in the state of Wisconsin. We have more important things to do, and we are not aligning this state with Donald Trump, whether it's tariffs, whether it's milk production, or it's dealing with immigration, because we are not sharing those values of hate and distrust and divisiveness that Donald Trump, with the compliance of Scott Walker, brings to this country.
All right, we're going into the grab bag one more time here, and I'm going to pull up a name, and we have Ms. Royce. So the question for you is, recently, Governor Walker chose to give a surplus in the state budget back to a select group of taxpayers through the use of a child tax credit. Given a similar situation, how would you elect to deal with the surplus? This is from Jason from Franklin.
Well, it would be great to have a budget surplus. We haven't had one in 8 years. I think we need to start making the investments in Wisconsin's future that every person in the state knows we really need to. We've got to make sure Wisconsin is a place where every person has access to affordable health care and where people can afford their prescription drugs. We've got to start investing in our kids, our K-12 public education system, but also early childhood education system, making childcare more affordable. We've got to make sure that people can afford to go to college and that those of us who have already earned a degree in higher ed can refinance our student loan debt so we can go on to buy a house, buy a car, have our own kids save for retirement. There are so many investments that we can make in Wisconsin's future to help this state move forward and become a place where everyone has the opportunity to succeed. As governor, I'm going to make sure I'm prioritizing these things to help make Wisconsin be a place of opportunity and fairness again, where every family can thrive.
I was going to ask, you are the parent of children. Did you elect to take that tax credit?
No, we did not. And I talked to a lot of families who did. And I understand that, $100 can go a long way for a lot of families. We've had a pretty seriously shrinking middle class in the state. And that's all the more reason why we have to make these investments to help working families in our state succeed. And as governor, I'm going to do a lot more than hand out a $100 election year gimmick to families across the state. I'm going to make the investments that we all know we need, whether it's in our schools, our roads, or our health care system.
I will pull another name. Matt Flynn. Mr. Flynn, will you do everything in your power to legalize cannabis, marijuana, and facilitate ethical implementation of a cannabis market in Wisconsin? This is from Sawyer in Milwaukee.
The answer is yes. I was perhaps the first, certainly one of the first, to advocate the full legalization of cannabis for recreational and medicinal purposes, tax it and regulate it for people over 21 for a very simple reason. We've got to stop mass incarceration. It has a disparate impact in two areas, in rural areas where people may not have the money to hire a lawyer, and in urban areas, and has a terrible racial impact. I will also pardon anybody in this state who is convicted or serving time for a possession nonviolent offense. And I have a message for judges out there, cowboy judges, who think they like to give large sentences or sentences for nonviolent crimes like this, and is this: if you convict them at 10 in the morning, I will pardon them at 2 in the afternoon. Don't waste my time, don't waste your time. The fact is, I'm going to be a strong governor, and if it's legal in Colorado, it's crazy to put people in jail in Wisconsin.
Let me follow that up with, then what would you do with the tax revenue built in from that new revenue source?
I would add that tax revenue to the $4.5 billion I'm going to get back from Foxconn. You see what I'm saying? The $1 billion in Medicaid money he turned down, the $800 million in train money. I'm going to repair our roads. I'm going to restore the University of Wisconsin to full funding with much lower fully funded tuition. I'm going to fund our public schools. There are 20 school districts in the state that have no foreign language programs. We are going to put it into education and roads and health care. Badger Care will have a subsidy then, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we're going to the grab bag. Go ahead, Mitch.
Okay, I think it is my turn. Mike McCabe. Mr. McCabe, this is a question from Jacob in Madison, and he writes that Wisconsin is one of the worst places to live for African Americans. What would you do to improve the economic and health outlook for African Americans in Wisconsin?
The biggest challenge we have as a state is inequality. Political inequality, social, economic, and racial inequality. And we have to commit ourselves to dealing with that underlying cause. We have to deal with the effects of mass incarceration. We have to deal with transportation and enable people to get to good paying jobs. We have to aspire as a state to erase the words working poor from our vocabulary. Do away with that phrase, and that means a living wage for every worker and health care for all, debt-free education for our young people. We need to embrace as a state what I call geyser economics. Economic prosperity doesn't trickle down, it gushes up. We need to use our resources as a state to empower regular working people from the ground up. And that's going to help people regardless of race across the board. But man, we've got to also deal with the fact that there is a new Jim Crow in place. It's been put in place. It is our duty to cut the legs out from underneath that new Jim Crow.
Okay, so go into specifics when you're talking about especially the plight of African American males in a place like Milwaukee. What are the specific programs that you would seek to put in place?
I mentioned the new Jim Crow. It stands on some very sturdy legs. One is voter suppression policies. Another is mass incarceration. Another is the militarization of policing, the evolution of policing. Used to be that the motto, protect and serve, was on every squad car. Now the philosophy seems to be intimidate and control. Those are sturdy legs that the new Jim Crow stands on. It is our duty as a state to cut the legs out from underneath that structure if we are going to create economic, social, and racial justice in our state.
Thank you.
Can we figure out who's...
I bet it's just me.
All right. It is Mr. Evers here. As you can see, we have not forgotten you. All right. So your question comes from Don in Franklin. He says, how would you address the rising costs of health care, particularly Medicaid, which is straining state budgets?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just tell a quick story. Early on in the campaign, I had the opportunity to be in western Wisconsin in La Crosse. And I met a guy, he was saying, well, we're going to move across the river to Minnesota. Obvious question is, why leave this state? He said, we're going to keep our jobs here in Wisconsin, but he said, the Affordable Care Act in Minnesota is half the cost for the same coverage as the Affordable Care Act in Wisconsin. Scott Walker did not take the Medicaid money. I would take the Medicaid money. Scott Walker did not set up the exchanges, including a public option. We would do that in the state of Wisconsin. Additionally, we would work very, very hard to make sure that the healthcare system becomes more transparent. Transparency is something that sets us free, and when we compare, be able to compare costs easily. We need to have consumers driving this.
So let me follow up with that. You know, before there was Obamacare,
right,
there was Romney Care in Massachusetts. Wisconsin has Badger Care for low-income residents.
Right.
Do you support a Badger Care for all, and would you mandate something? Let me start, because that's 30 seconds you have. Would you have a Badger Care for all, not means that?
Yeah, at the end of the day, health care is really important. I'm a cancer survivor, and the issue of making sure that pre-existing conditions don't impact people in the state of Wisconsin is absolutely critical. Do I think we're going to get there immediately? No. But I do know by getting those Medicaid money flowing into the system, we can have people actually be sustainable, clinics and hospitals and dental offices across the state. That is so important to have that be a starting place, but we do need to have an end goal in mind, and that would be for all.
All right, now to our final question of the night. And this question is for all 8 candidates on the dais. You will have 30 seconds to respond. 30 seconds to respond.
Spell Giannis Antetokounmpo. Just quit. That is not the question. All right.
I think I got that one.
Since 1986, only one Democrat, Jim Doyle, has been elected governor. Republicans have won 7 out of 9 elections. Do you promise to support the Democratic nominee? And if so, specifically, how would you help him or her get elected? You have 30 seconds. Ms. Feinhoff.
Well, thank you. Yes, absolutely. Democrats need to win. Our future of a state is at stake right now. I would help the same way that I helped after the 2012 campaign when I lost in the election to Tom Barrett, and I worked with Mr. Barrett to help in western Wisconsin to bring the vote, because whoever wins statewide is going to have to win in western Wisconsin. And we're going to need a candidate who can appeal to that part of the state and bring people to the polls.
Mr. Soglin.
Well, we've been asked that question repeatedly over the last year. All of us, with one exception, which is Mike McCabe, have consistently said yes. And I want to make it clear that my support is unequivocal. I'm not going to ask or condition my support on anything. I will support that candidate. I will support that candidate, and I will provide voter support lists that I've got. I will go anywhere and whenever I can be helpful to that candidate.
Ms. Royce?
Enthusiastically, yes. My kids' future is on the line. All of our kids' future is on the line. You know, recent polling shows that over 70% of our voters are enthusiastic about the idea of electing our first woman governor. And I'm going to work my heart out to make sure that we can win this election. We're not going to win it by talking about all the failures of the last 8 years. We're going to win it with our positive, optimistic vision for Wisconsin's future and building a state where all of us have the opportunity to thrive. That's what I've done in this campaign, and I will do that for the nominee.
Mr. Pade, your response.
Yes, I will support whoever the nominee is, and you know, I think if we win, it's because I was nominated. But more importantly, when you look at the military or in the private sector, when something doesn't work, you do an after action. You understand why isn't this working and how can we do it different. And I got into this race because I was tired of seeing an election where the Republicans owned the agenda, where we were just responding to where they were taking our state, and it was constantly taken in a direction that does not help working families. So I want to bring new ideas and a new vision, and that's how we're going to win.
The answer is easy, yes. But remember the last time we won statewide in Wisconsin, we had an African American at the top of the ticket. And I will tell you this, I'm the state president of the Professional Firefighters of Wisconsin. I represent members as far north as Superior, as far south as Kenosha, and everything in between. And if you came to my convention, you would see 250 delegates, and 248 of those are white males that have elected me by acclamation 3 times. That means something. I have a plan to bring 50,000 more African Americans in our state out to vote. That's how we win a general election. That's how we're going to win this thing and beat Scott Walker.
Mr. McCabe.
Wisconsin needs a very different kind of leadership, and we need a new governor if we're going to become the state we have the potential to be. But it is a mistake. I stand apart from my colleagues up here on stage. It's a mistake to make a party loyalty pledge. That sends the wrong message to voters. It says that you all think that party comes before everything. And it also says that whatever the Democratic Party puts forward is good enough. It's not good enough. Scott Walker's been elected 3 times. It's our job to excite people and inspire people and give them a reason to vote for a different direction.
Mr. Flynn.
In October, there's only going to be one of us on this stage taking on Scott Walker. Only one. A lot of good people here. Who on this stage has the demeanor, the ability, and the experience to dismantle him, to eviscerate him? Because, right, this is a Baker Street irregulars over here have a good sense of humor. The fact of the matter is that there's only one. I think I'm that person. If I'm not that person, I understand. And then I will campaign for anyone who asks me to. I endorse all of them, and I would campaign as requested. Thank you.
I would support the candidate and in every way possible help him or her win. It's going to be me, though. I have won 70% of the vote last time I ran for state superintendent. I'm the only person on this stage that has won a statewide race. Last time, 70% of the vote, 70 of 72 counties. That isn't important. This race is about all of Wisconsin. The Milwaukee-Madison corridor is absolutely imperative for the Democrats, but this will be a full state race.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now, each candidate will get a minute, 10 seconds. A minute, 10 seconds for closing statements. The order was chosen by lottery earlier this afternoon, and the first will be Mr. Pade.
Thank you. Thanks for having us tonight. Thank you, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I'm a proud graduate of the University of Wisconsin system. I went to Eau Claire, so we're a friendly rivalry, but I enjoy being down here. We have a choice to make in August. Where are we going to take our party? Where are we going to take our state? We have a lot to fix. People are working too hard for too little money. Our students are not getting the education that they need. We need to fix all those things, but we need a vision that takes us further to address the generational and technology changes that are happening rapidly in our economy, in our cities, across the world, that are impacting us here in Wisconsin. To make sure that all of our farmers can get the income that they need. To make certain that everyone who's working really hard can get the money they need to pay the bills. And we need innovative solutions, big ideas that Wisconsin used to be known for from the progressive movement. Things like reworking our tax code so that it works for the middle class, having regular refundable tax credits that work to eliminate child poverty, doing things like public service initiatives that gives everyone an opportunity to get education in exchange for serving their state. We can do big ideas again, and we can't do it unless we have new leadership, and that's why I'm in this race, and that's why I'm the best candidate.
Ms. Feinhout.
Thank you. My life experience is very different from the people here on the stage. My father dug ditches and finished cement for a living. I really wanted to go to college, and he didn't want to sign my financial aid papers because he thought the college would be wasted on a girl, which is why it's so important to me that we have free tuition for two-year-end tech colleges. I know what it's like to get up at dawn and milk cows and get hit across the face with a nasty tail from an unhappy cow. I live in a part of the state, a beautiful Buffalo County, where internet comes at a slow walk, and you need a guide to tell you not only where the fish are biting, but where you can get a cell signal. I know what it's like to run against a popular Republican incumbent and win. I have won 3 times in a district that also Scott Walker won 3 times and Donald Trump won. And I don't need a crash course in what Scott Walker has done in the last 8 years. I've written alternatives to the governor's budget with exactly the same amount of money. I've shown where the money should have gone if the governor had put people first. I ask for your vote on the 14th of August.
Our next closing statement comes from Mike McCabe.
So far in the 21st century, no state in America has seen its middle class shrink more than Wisconsin. And we've got the potential to be so much better and do so much more as a state. But to do that, we've got to deal with the fact that there's a cancer growing in the body of our democracy. Cronyism and corruption and what amounts to legal bribery has been allowed to take root in our state, and it has to be uprooted. Because I want this state to be a place where there's health care for all. I come from a farming background too, and I was 22 years old before I was first covered by health insurance because our family chose to forego it in order to keep our farm profitable. But I'll tell you this, we're not going to get good health care from a sick political system, and we're not going to get living wages from a dying democracy, and we're not going to get clean air and clean water from a dirty politics. And we're not going to get anything more than thoughts and prayers after each new mass shooting, as long as elected officials are paid to take no other action. We've got to deal with that cancer in the body of our democracy, cut it out for this state to become what it has the potential to be.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe.
No
Ms.
applause,
Boyce.
please.
Thank you. We have 8 good people on this stage. But I have a track record of actually turning our big ideas and our progressive values into real results. When I was the executive director of NARAL Pro-Choice Wisconsin, I helped to pass the first pro-choice legislation in this state in 30 years through an anti-choice Republican assembly. So I know how to reach across the aisle and get things done for working families in Wisconsin. I also helped expand health care to over 80,000 Wisconsinites when I was in the assembly as the vice chair of the Committee on Health. We need somebody with that kind of commitment. I helped make Wisconsin a leader in banning BPA, a toxic chemical in children's products. So much so that California looked and said, hey, we better get on the boat because look what Wisconsin's doing. We can do that again. We can be a leader in addressing climate change and clean energy. We can be the education state again, and we can make sure every Wisconsinite is covered by health insurance. Let's do it together. I ask for your vote on August 14th to make Wisconsin a place of opportunity again. Thank you.
Mr. Soglin.
Well, we've got a challenge in front of us, and it is Scott Walker. It is a backwards view of the state of Wisconsin. We need a candidate for the Democratic Party who not only can describe the problem and recommend solutions, but has actually governed a $300 million operating and capital budget, knows how to balance a budget and to make the tough decisions about law enforcement and community services, knows when asked the question, what are you going to do about disparity in the state of Wisconsin, how we are going to change the public education system, how we're going to deal with out-of-school time where children are 2/3 of their waking hours, not in the classroom, but given other opportunities to learn. We're going to have the opportunity to reverse the way tax credits are used. Instead of putting them into Foxconn, putting them into affordable housing. Someone has to do this who has had the experience and knows the state of Wisconsin and is visible.
Thank you. Right on cue. Mr. Flynn.
I'm running for governor because, very simply, I'm not going to stand by and watch our democracy destroyed. In Washington, D.C., Donald Trump is betraying us to Vladimir Putin and the Russians for bribery and blackmail. And in Madison, Scott Walker has betrayed us to his donors. We used to be known for honest government, clean water, and high wages. And today we're known around the country for corrupt government, dirty water, and low wages. And I'm going to change that. When I served in the Navy, I defended our country. When I served as a lawyer, I defended my clients. And when I serve as governor, I will defend you. And the ship that I was stationed on had sailors from Mississippi and New York, from Alabama, California, Wisconsin, Arkansas, Wyoming. We were shipmates. There was no north-south divide. There was no urban-rural divide. We stood watch together. We worked together. We went on liberty together. We were shipmates. Everybody in this room is my shipmate. Everybody in the state is my shipmate. And if you put this Navy vet in the governor's chair, I will turn the ship in the right direction. Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell.
We have a term in the fire service that's called all hands working. It means that everyone is working together to solve a problem. Just recently, 2 days ago, actually, we lost a firefighter in Sun Prairie. He's not in my association. He's not one of my members. But you know what? When I got the call that we lost a brother in the line of duty, I didn't ask, was he a friend of Scott Walker, or what was his political affiliation? I didn't say, well, is he a union member? I said, no, we're going to send resources on Sun Prairie, and that's what we did. We have a shared enemy in this state. It is the division that Scott Walker has created. And we are better than that as a state of Wisconsin. We can do better. That's why in my campaign, I've brought coalitions together of people that don't normally think like us, people that don't normally see eye to eye. I don't just go into great town hall meetings or Democratic Party functions and everyone's doing this and snapping. No, I go in the belly of the beast and talk to people that we need to vote for us. That's why in our campaign, we brought everything to the table. Everything it takes to win. Money, marbles, and chalk. Everything it takes to play. And we have to go out there and win this thing against Scott Walker November 6th. And I'm the candidate to do it.
Mr. Evers.
I think the state of Wisconsin is blessed to have great candidates like you see in front of me. The issues between us are pretty small. I mean, we're all Democrats, for gosh sakes. You would think that we'd be pretty similar on the issues. This campaign is about defeating Scott Walker. He came in office saying, we're going to divide and conquer. And that's exactly what he did. I have won statewide. I'm the only candidate that has won statewide. Additionally, I have lived all across the state of Wisconsin. I began my career as a teacher in Toma and a principal. I've worked in Oakfield and the Fox Valley. That's an important part of the state. That's where 40% of the vote comes from. Those things are critical to winning this race. Additionally, I have actually run things. I've been in charge of schools, school districts, regional agencies, and now I'm in charge of an agency that's responsible for 860,000 kids and the 100,000 adults that serve them. I will start on day one, no assembly required.
All right.
Thank you.
On behalf of my co-moderators, I want to say thank you and good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good job.